The environment has a great way of making leaders learn. I think organizations simply need to say this role, this pay. I think I would define greatness as progress.
Thank you for being here, Pallavi.
Pleasure.
Pleasure. Pallavi, why don't you give me a brief about your journey, the complete corporate journey, and how you started in the corporate world after your MBA?
Well, that's a very long story.
Okay.
And a very, very unique one, I would think. That typically as a new MBA graduate, I started with Procter & Gamble as a management trainee. So good multinational FMCG company, hot marketing job, etc. But I decided to get married and my husband was in another city, so I gave up that job after a year. And I started working with a startup market research company.
Okay.
And I was taking a little bit of a break after my first child was born, and I was at home. I hail from a business family. Typically, traditionally, daughters never really joined the family business, but my father had only 3 daughters. I happened to be the youngest, so the most unlikely candidate to actually throw in the hat. But I decided to do it, and there were several reasons to do that.
So let's start with, I think you finished your MBA outside of India. You finished
in Syracuse University, yeah.
And then you came here and then you had a family business. So was there, is the context in the way people work outside India and that the fact that you have a tie with a global brand, do you find any difference in India and outside of India? Is there a context you want to bring to the table?
I think because because I come from different industries, I can tell you that I think it's more related to the industry than the country.
Okay.
So when I was in financial services, whether it was India or it was in the US, it was very cutthroat, very money driven, very ambitious, lots of politics. The Dale Carnegie business, even the Dale Carnegie has a very unique culture globally. It's very driven by what we call as the famous Dale Carnegie principles. So we're very empathetic, we are very compassionate. By nature, that has become the culture of our organization globally, the network of our global network. And I think therefore we are a human side of the corporate world, even internally, and I see that happen even with our HR counterparts. They're people-oriented people, right? So when we talk to customers, they're HR people. So they're talking about the people story. We all understand and we're all driven by the fact that we believe. So when you're asked a question, customers first or employees first, people like us and our customers who are HR people will always say employees first, right? So that's where we come from. We believe that all business outcomes, all business results come from what your people can do, right? So you can replicate products, you can replicate services, you can replicate technology, and so that's the famous line. But you can't replicate your people. So that's really the crux of where we come from.
Going back to HCC, and I love the example of your masala box. So do you think it has changed since then?
I hope it has. I hope it has. I haven't been part of HCC now for 18 years. And so...
but the marketplace, I mean, has that really changed with the way 18 years ago, the way people would...
You know, I'm sure there are more civil engineers in HCC than having nobody as a civil engineer when I was there. And I know that the people I recruited at that point in time are still in HCC, which means that they don't just come and go, right? So I think the proportion of women in these organizations is increasing. But again, you see that you have more women in services,
yes,
and you have less women in engineering and manufacturing, and some of those are realities. We do have pay gaps, we do have gender pay gaps. Today the biggest trending story is the Me Too campaign.
Yeah.
So in India, so there's a lot of work that the gender agenda can do with, yeah.
So do you, what role could leaders or people who are watching you on this video right now could play? How do they influence, reducing the pay gap primarily, if there is one?
See, this is I have a very unique view on this. I think if it's the pay gap, it's the easiest thing to fix. It's the easiest thing to fix. You bring parity in salaries. It's a budgetary allocation. What you can't change is mindsets. You cannot change them overnight. So that needs more work. So therefore, it always focuses me as to why companies don't do anything about pay gaps. And of course, where does the pay gap come from? The pay gap doesn't necessarily come at the start of the career. The pay gap happens because usually women drop off the career path because of children, marriage, whatever, and when they come back, they've lost years, and therefore they are not at parity, right? And therefore they're continuing to play catch up for their entire life, no matter if they become CEOs, you know. So I think organizations simply need to say this role, this pay.
So you mentioned about mindsets, and then you mentioned about, you know, even policies or procedures which could be different within the genders, and how in your experience, coming from your own startup, working along with a global brand, working for a construction company, then started off with Procter and Gamble. So how do you play a role to kind of equalize or individualize you know, the environment for that individual, so they could perform or they can feel that this is a great place to hang about?
Yeah. So, you know, I think I've seen very large companies really create a very special working place, and a small company like ours, and we may be big for the training industry, but in terms of headcount, we are 107 people. And I think it's for the leader to be able to actually create an environment where everybody can express themselves. So I don't know if you're familiar with Google's Project Aristotle.
Heard of
but
it, but
yeah, so that project was simply where they were trying to analyze who were their most successful teams or what made teams most successful. It was the ability of the leader to create a safe environment for everybody to be able to speak up, to express themselves.
Do people have to be cautious of a few things? What are the do's and don'ts? You could start by telling them, read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
I'm telling everybody, read the book, take the course, and I'm not even making a promotion here. I really believe it. And I think the environment has a great way of making leaders learn to not shoot their mouths off, to listen carefully, and the way forward. It's not just enough to give inspiring speeches. It's not just enough to say, this is the fantastic, we're going to be so big in 5 years. Yeah, for a moment I feel good, and then I go back to my everyday life and I realize that I'm not getting there. So taking that piece and breaking it down and then empowering people to do it, I think that's the secret to leadership. And I think build your strong team.
How would you, just a question, how would you define greatness?
So greatness, I think, is, if it's greatness at work, it's different. If it's greatness personally, it possibly is different. It's great if it's both the same. But I've seen people, for me, I think I would define greatness as progress, because every person is at a different journey in his life, right? As long as they're moving it forward, I think they're doing a great thing, and they're feeling great about themselves. So I define it as progress.
Someone fresh out of their MBA school, or someone just going on the corporate career. So any words of caution for them? They have a big to-do list of what they should do, but is there anything they should be cautious of?
I think when you start, you should be open and you should be confident to express your views, but you should also be not rigid, because there is a perspective, especially if there's an intergenerational perspective, that you need to learn. And workplaces are different, so try and be open, and try and be flexible and adaptable, and be learning constantly. Continuously build your networks right from day one. Correct. Because your networks help you succeed.
Correct.
So that's it.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. Pleasure having you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ruben.